Hello, everyone, and welcome back to What's with the World. I'm your podcast host, and my name is Bella. Today, we are going to be talking about what happened during the 2020 vice presidential debate, and this is a lot to unpack, so let's get started. And as always, I want to start this episode with an interactive activity. So I'm going to ask two questions that I asked in last week's episode. So if you haven't seen last week's episode, I recommend you watch it. It was about the presidential debate. So my first question is for you to guess how many times Pence interrupted Harris. He interrupted her 10 times. And my next question is how many times did Kamala Harris interrupt Mike Pence? And the answer is 5 times. So if you would recall from last week's episode, which if you haven't seen it, I recommend you go watch it. It was about the presidential debate. But in that debate, Trump had interrupted Biden more than 50 times, and Biden interrupted Trump more than 20 times. So this is a dramatic decrease in the amount of overlapping dialogue that we saw in the presidential debate. This debate was a lot more respectful and mature. So that's just kind of a precedent for what we're going to be talking about. And so today we are going to be unpacking what topics were discussed during the 2020 vice presidential debate and the stance that Kamala Harris and Mike Pence took throughout the discussion. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is what was discussed when the topic of the pandemic was brought up. So Harris had brought up some statistics. She said that 1 in 5 businesses have closed. There have been over 200 deaths in America, 7 million contractions just in the U.S. alone, and thousands have had to file for unemployment. And Senator Harris brought up all these facts to kind of tie into the idea that the president did not handle the pandemic well. It could have been handled a lot better. And he didn't inform people that it was airborne. He didn't really stress how lethal it was. And instead, he tried to cover it up in order to keep the economy going, in order to keep people calm, which she said is not really what he should have done. He should have been more concerned and respectful of the people to tell them what the real issue was going on and how dangerous it was. But instead, he covered it up by calling it a hoax and things like that. She also said that the president still does not have a plan, but she wants her and Biden, if they are elected, they would like to make testing and the vaccine available to all people, and they want to make it free. So that's a really big deal. They want to make this vaccine available for everyone by making it free. So they will be investing a lot of money into creating the vaccine, not only creating it, but distributing it out to the public without any charge from anyone. That's the main thing that Kamala Harris brought up during her 2 uninterrupted minutes. And then Pence then had his 2 uninterrupted minutes where he said that from the first day, Trump has put the health of American people first. Trump really cares about the American people, and that he basically blamed the disease on China. He said that diseases that were brought to America were brought by 5 Chinese people traveling from China to America who had contracted the disease and still brought it to America. So he basically placed all the blame on China, which you can decide for yourself if you think that America is partially responsible for not taking the proper precautions and not following guidelines, or if you think that it's totally China's fault for not doing a better job of warning us. So Pence also said that Trump shut down travel with China, and which is something that Biden wanted to keep open because he claimed that it was xenophobic. But Trump shut down all travel with China during when the pandemic started becoming really serious, so that way no Chinese people could come into America and no Americans can leave for China. But Biden's stance on this was that it was xenophobic and it was discriminatory towards the Chinese people. So Pence also said that the Trump campaign would like to reinvent testing and that they have billions of supplies for doctors and nurses. That's something that they have brought to the table that they believe that Biden couldn't have done. He also said that 10 million vaccines would be created by the end of the year. And it's already October, so 2 more months, he says that 10 million vaccines will be available for the American people. He also said that vaccine and testing by Biden is plagiarism. So Biden came up with this plan for testing people for coronavirus and for coming up with the vaccine, but Pence is claiming that this is plagiarism from the Trump campaign, that they stole this the Biden campaign stole this from Trump. And as a response to Pence claiming that the Trump administration has done everything they can to keep COVID under control and to keep the Americans healthy and safe, Kamala responded by saying that clearly Trump's plan has not worked. If you look at the US death toll, America makes up 4% of the country's population, yet we make up over 20% of the death tolls and the COVID cases. So that's what she's saying. It doesn't really make sense that you're saying that we've done everything we can, but we're still having these high numbers as opposed to other wealthy countries whose numbers are decreasing. America's is continually increasing. And Mrs. Harris also brought up that the vice president, who is Pence right now, is supposed to be in charge of the task force, and therefore he knew about the fatality rate that could come with COVID, but he wanted to keep people calm. The president and Pence wanted to keep people calm. They didn't want to freak anyone out, so they kept this a secret. But Kamala said that they shouldn't have. They should have properly warned the American people so that they could have had more time to prepare, and therefore the U.S. death toll could have been lower and the contracted cases could have been lower. So Mike Pence's response to this was that everything that came from Dr. Fauci went straight to the president, and the president then straightforward told the people. So this kind of contradicts what Kamala is claiming, because he's saying that everything that the doctors, the professionals know, they told the president, and the president went straight to the people. Whereas Kamala Harris is saying that the president dragged it out way too long. He didn't give the people enough warning from the beginning, as COVID had originally come to America in January, but the president had not warned people until mid-March. Vice President Pence also claimed that if the president didn't shut down the economy, 2.2 million more Americans would have died. And Pence also defended himself and the Trump campaign rallies by saying that he puts the trust in American people. So he trusts the Americans to make decisions for themselves, where he doesn't have to enforce COVID guidelines such as social distancing and masks and everything, because he believes that the American people should be responsible for themselves. And he says that everyone who attempted the rallies, or not the rallies, the events, everyone who attended the presidential events were all tested, and that the rallies were all outdoor events, and that he again reinstates that the trust of the American people should lie in the citizens to make the right decisions. But a question that is posed is that should the citizens have total control, or should their leaders actually lead? So again, that's up for you to debate. Should the president enforce more guidelines on the American people, even at events, private events, or should they kind of step back and say, hey, Americans, you're in charge of yourselves, and you can decide you could decide whether to follow these guidelines or not. You have our complete trust. Or should the leaders take that leader role and enforce it in order to keep everyone safe? And so Kamala Harris actually takes a different stance than Pence when she says that you have to tell the people what they don't want to hear in order to keep them safe. So Pence is just saying, oh, we trust in the American people. They can do what they do to keep themselves and others around them safe. And Ms. Harris is saying, no, you have to keep order and you have to put these restrictions, and it may not be what people want to hear, but in doing that, you're going to save a lot of lives. And she states that the Trump campaign had failed repeatedly to state the truth, and that the American people have had to sacrifice far too much because they were given a lack of direction and enforcement of these laws and rules to keep everyone safe. Okay, now moving on from the pandemic, the next thing that was brought up was the role of the vice president. And this is a really, really important election and a really, really important debate of the vice presidents, because either president that is elected, Donald Trump or Pence, they will be the oldest president in U.S. history to take office, meaning that there is a chance that they will become incapable to do their job, whether they pass away or contract some sort of illness. There is a possibility that they won't be able to function in office. So what happens when the president is able to function? The vice president takes that role. So that is why this topic was brought up. What is the role of the vice president? And when the moderator posed this question, Mike Pence actually skipped over the question, didn't answer it at all, and went back to the topic of the vaccine. And he said that the vaccine has been brought in record time by the Trump administration, And then he brings up the swine flu, but he continues to ignore the question about the role of the vice president, which is really interesting because it's probably one of the most important questions that was brought up during the debate, as there is a huge possibility that the vice president elected will become president sometime if the elected candidate is incapable of performing their job. So Pence doesn't even consider the question or answer it. So it's then passed on to Harris during her two uninterrupted minutes, and I noticed something that she established a personal connection with the audience by sharing a story of her family and how her mother had her when she was in her 20s and all this stuff. And then she said that Joe Biden and her, share a lot of similar values, meaning that they will fight for the rights of the people and they care about people and they care about equality. And so she's basically saying that if um, Vice President Biden were to become incapable of doing his job, she shares the same values as him, so it really won't be a dramatic shift in leadership. And then she talks about her background and her qualifications and all of these things that kind of establish credibility within the audience. One of the main points I gathered on the topic of the role of the vice president. And the next thing that was discussed was whether the American people have a right to know about the health and condition of the president as he battles COVID. So Pence first talks and he says that the voters do have a right to know about the health and well-being of the president, and it should be public information. And then it goes to Miss Kamala Harris, and she says that the voters have a right to know about the health and well-being. So basically agreeing with Pence on that topic, that the American people do deserve to be informed on what is going on with the president and his condition as he battles COVID. And she also said that the president is not honest because he doesn't talk about his taxes and health, and that Biden is a lot more transparent than Donald Trump in discussing those things. And she brings up the statistic that Trump has only paid $750 into federal taxes. And she said that this means he has over $400 million in debt. And the American people don't know who he's in debt to. And she feels like that's something that we should be able to be informed on. And she again brings up that Joe Biden is very transparent and he's very honest. So Mike Pence's response to Ms. Harris bringing up Trump's tax records was he says that Trump is a businessman and he has to find these ways to save his money, and that the public records are not accurate and that Trump did not pay that little of taxes. He paid more taxes. But again, we don't really have proof of this. So now moving on to the topic of economy, and Kamala Harris was the first to speak on this, and she said that her and Joe Biden, the Biden campaign, plan on raising $4 trillion in taxes on businesses and wealthy. So just to reiterate this, the Biden campaign is only planning on raising taxes for the wealthy and wealthy corporations. So those who make over $400K a year will have raised taxes, but those who don't, their taxes will not be raised. And so she says that the economy's strength is reliant on the family and the average worker. She brings up how Trump is only concerned about making the rich richer, and she brings up how his tax benefit raised money and benefited the 1% of the richest Americans in the nation. So she brought up how Trump only really cares about making the wealthy wealthier, and he doesn't really care about the average worker, average American family. And she also said that the economy's strength, according to Trump, is reliant on wealthy. So he only cares about the wealthy people because he believes that those are the ones who are going to strengthen the economy. And this is contradicting what Joe Biden is saying by the economy strength is reliant on the average worker, not the wealthiest people. And she brings up Joe Biden and her plan to invest in renewable energy and innovation and science and education, and how they would like to make a 2-year community college free for all students attending. So for every student attending a 2-year community college, they will be able to attend for free, and that the student loan debt is going to be cut by $100K per person, which is a huge deal. Pence's stance on the economy, he talked about how Trump wants to cut taxes across the board, including for wealthy people. So wealthy people won't have an increase in taxes like the Biden campaign is trying to do. So Pence's and Trump's plan really appeals more to wealthier people because they won't have to pay as higher taxes, whereas the Biden plan appeals more to the majority of people who make under 400K a year because they will be able to pay the same taxes and still have that income of taxes coming from the wealthy people that is going to be put back into society and things such as the police force and public school system and everything like that. Pence also brought up how Biden wants to expand the Green New Deal that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had come up with. He wants to expand this and ban fossil fuels. And this is contradicting what Biden had said in the presidential debate when he says that he does not support the Green New Deal, he does not want to implement it, which is also contradictory to what he put on his website that he does support the Green New Deal. So I'm personally still confused about his stance on that because on his official campaign website it says he does support the Green New Deal, but Biden said in the debate that he doesn't support it, and then Pence is saying that Biden does support it. So that whole thing is just a little confusing to me, but that's just what I've heard and read about. And Harris's response to this is that Biden does not want to raise tax on anyone making over 400K a year. So she's kind of reinstating that so that people who maybe aren't as wealthy know that they're not going to be negatively impacted by the tax raise on wealthy people. And she also says that Biden does not want to end fracking, which is something also contradictory to what he has said in the past. And Harris also brings up how during the Great Recession that was brought on by COVID-19, which is basically the economy is dropping, it's not doing too well, Trump had implemented the Recovery Act, which had been plagiarized by Biden, according to Harris. She says that Biden actually was the one who came up with the Recovery Act, but Pence and Trump are trying to take credit for it. And it's something that really aided in this Great Recession that we're facing during the time of COVID. And Senator Kamala Harris also brings up how when Joe Biden was vice president to Obama, they had come up with the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, and that this has saved 20 million Americans from going bankrupt while receiving medical care. And another thing that Obamacare does, it protects people with pre-existing conditions. So if you have a illness or syndrome or something like that that you've had prior to receiving Obamacare, they cannot reject you simply because you have that pre-existing condition. And this is something that Pence says that the Trump campaign is going to keep even when they do get rid of Obamacare. They are still going to protect people with pre-existing conditions in their own healthcare system, though. Now, moving on, let's talk about climate change. And the first one to take their 2 uninterrupted minutes was Pence. And he said that the hurricanes and wildfires that have been occurring continuously in America and more consistently now are because of climate change, and that he believes that we need to listen to science in order to fix these problems. And he says that he wants the air and land to be clean, and that he says that we have the clearest air and land in the world. Is this true? Not sure. But that's what he claims. And then he also says that he wants to progress a clean environment and he wants a strong free market economy. And that through innovation and natural gas and fracking, we can achieve this. He also says how wildfires in California and Oregon, more specifically, are because of the unclean forest and unkept forest. So there's a lot of dead trees, a lot of dead plants that are catching fire, and that's the main cause of these forest fires and wildfires as opposed to climate change. Now for Senator Kamala Harris's response, she says that Biden will not ban fracking, which is something that Pence repeatedly brings up during this debate, is that Biden wants to ban fracking, but Kamala Harris says it's fact. It's fact. He's not going to change his mind. He will not ban fracking. And she also says that through Biden's plan to create clean and renewable energy, 7 million more jobs will be created. So now we are going to talk about the candidates' stance on China and what they believe China's role is in COVID and the spread of COVID and the pandemic in general. So Pence says that China is to blame for COVID completely and that they're the ones who brought this virus to America, and that Trump did a good job of suspending travel from China as soon as he knew about COVID. And Harris's response to this is that Trump lost American lives, jobs, and standing with China. because he insulted China, it was xenophobic what he did, and that Trump has this weird obsession with getting rid of achievements by Obama. One of the examples of this is that as soon as Trump came into office, he fired the staff and team of workers that Obama had put into work to handle any diseases, potential diseases that could enter America. So Obama kind of predicted something like COVID happening, something like COVID coming to America, a disease that would come to America and kind of have a negative impact on us. So when President Barack Obama was in office, he had a team of disease experts to handle something like that. And as soon as Trump came into office, he fired them and said that we didn't need them. Which, obviously may have been wrong about, because now we have COVID in the US. Another topic that was brought up that I want to briefly talk about was the topic of the Supreme Court. And if you didn't see last week's episode or the episode even before that, so basically every episode that I've made so far, I talked about how since Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has passed away, and there's an overwhelming amount of Republicans in the Supreme Court, and now because Justice Ginsburg has passed away and she was a Democrat, her place will most likely be filled by another Republican, as chosen by a Republican president, aka Donald Trump. So, this topic of the Supreme Court was brought up, and Pence basically said that it is not a violation for President Trump to appoint a new justice while he is still president. But Senator Kamala Harris brought up how when President Abraham Lincoln was in office, so, Honest Abe, a justice had actually passed away less than 30 days before the election. And Abraham Lincoln could have appointed a new justice, but he said that it wasn't the right thing to do because the people should have the opportunity to choose the president before the president is able to elect a new justice. So that was a really interesting point I thought that she brought up, was to reference history and a really credible president. So the next thing that was talked about that I'll bring up some brief points about was the topic of race and racial tension. And in this segment, Breonna Taylor was brought up. And the candidates were asked whether or not they believed that Breonna Taylor received justice. And Pence said that he is very sorry for their family's loss and that any innocent American life that is lost is a tragedy. But he also believes in the justice system, and he trusts that the justice system did their job, and if they say that the police officers that killed Breonna Taylor aren't guilty, then they aren't guilty. And kind of in contrast to this, Kamala Harris says that we need police reform and that her killing was not justified by any means, and that we need to reform the police because as of right now, police only have to go through a 6-month training before they become police officers. And she says that they need to be held accountable, they need to be retrained, they need to be trained to have racial sensitivity training, basically. So if they see a racial minority, they need to have training on how to address that situation. So that is my summary on what went on during the 2020 vice presidential debate, and I highly recommend, if you haven't, to go back and watch it, just so you could kind of experience it for yourself, develop your own opinions, come up with your own main points. And as a closing statement, I think that most people can agree that this debate went immensely smoother than the presidential debate, as there was a lot more maturity displayed by the candidates, there was less interrupting, and this led to the candidates being able to convey and discuss their ideas in a more productive way. So a quote that I want to close out with is that leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. John F. Kennedy.